Welcome to Truth Cherry. Please like, subscribe, and comment. The Twitter Files, Part 4. Twitter Files, Part 4. The removal of Donald Trump, January 7, 2021. As the pressure builds, Twitter executives build the case for a permanent ban. On January 7, senior Twitter execs create justifications to ban Trump, seek a change of policy for Trump alone, distinct from other political leaders, express no concern for the free speech or democracy implications of a ban. This hashtag Twitter Files is reported with at House. For years, Twitter had resisted calls to ban Trump. Blocking a world leader from Twitter, it wrote in 2018, would hide important info, hamper necessary discussion around their words and actions. But after the events of January 6, the internal and external pressure on Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey grows. Former First Lady Michelle Obama, tech journalist Kara Swisher, the ADL, high-tech VC Chris Sacca, and many others publicly call on Twitter to permanently ban Trump. Chris Sacca tweets on January 6, "You've got blood on your hands, Jack Dorsey and Zuck. For 4 years you've rationalized this terror. Inciting violent treason is not a free speech exercise. If you work at those companies, it's on you too. Shut it down." In a fairly lengthy open letter, in this highlighted section, Michelle Obama says now is the time for Silicon Valley companies to stop enabling this monstrous behavior and go even further than they have already by permanently banning this man from their platforms and putting in place policies to prevent their technology from being used by the nation's leaders to fuel what happened on J6. Kara Swisher, in an article featured in the publication Intelligencer, the article headlined, "It's time for social media platforms to permanently ban Trump." The ADL put out a tweet that said, "2 bare minimum tweets after the Capitol has been stormed by extremists is too little, too late. Jack Dorsey, it's overdue to suspend at real Donald Trump until his account stops promoting disinformation and inciting the wrong behavior." Dorsey was on vacation in French Polynesia the week of January 4 through 8, 2021. He phoned into meetings but also delegated much of the handling of the situation to senior execs Yoel Roth, Twitter's global head of trust and safety, and Vijaya Gaudy, head of legal, policy, and trust. As context, it's important to understand that Twitter staff and senior execs were overwhelmingly progressive. In 2018, 2020, and 2022, 96%, 98%, and 99% of Twitter staff's political donations went to Democrats. In 2017, Roth tweeted that there were actual Nazis in the White House. In April 2022, Roth told a colleague that his goal is to drive change in the world, which is why he decided not to become an academic. In this first screenshot, Yoel Roth says, "Yes, that person in the pink hat is clearly a bigger threat to your brand of feminism than actual Nazis in the White House." In this second communication he says, "Yeah, academia is by far the most abusive work environment I've ever been in. The entire system is exploitative in a ton of ways. And also not necessarily productive if your goal is to drive change in the world, which was the main reason I left." On January 7, Jack Dorsey emails employees saying Twitter needs to remain consistent in its policies, including the right of users to return to Twitter after a temporary suspension. After, Roth reassures an employee that people who care about this aren't happy with where we are in that exchange. Roth says, "Jack's emails have been fine. But ultimately, I think people want to hear from Vijaya, or Dell, or someone closer to the specifics of this who can reassure them that people who care about this are thinking deeply about these problems and aren't happy with where we are. A few engineers have reached out to me directly about it, and I'm chatting with them. But it's so clear they just want to know that someone is doing something about this. And it's not that we're ignoring the issues here." The employee responds, "I think there's also an opportunity to help people understand that While it seems obvious and simple that we should permaban his personal account, we can't afford to take that immediate action without first playing the movie out and anticipating all the other things that can happen, and then figure out the plans for those possible scenarios. If we suspend the personal account and he posts the same thing on the official government account, do we suspend that too? People can be forgiven for not thinking beyond the thing that's immediately in front of them, but Jack, Vijaya, Dell, and you don't have the luxury of just pulling the trigger without thinking things through. We tell them repeatedly that people are on it and people are working on it, and they're scratching their heads wondering how hard can it be to decide if this single account is in violation. Around 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time, Roth D.'s his colleagues with news that he is excited to share. Guess what, he writes. Jack just approved repeat offender for civic integrity. The new approach would create a system where 5 violations would result in permanent suspension. In that exchange, he elaborates that directional approach would be something like, labels which are severe enough to result in disabled engagements incur strikes. Strike 1, label only. Strike 2, label only. Strike 3, labeled plus 12-hour timeout. Strike 4, labeled plus 7-day timeout. Strike 5, permanent suspension. Progress, exclaims a member of Roth's trust and safety team. The exchange between Roth and his colleagues makes clear that they had been pushing Jack Dorsey for greater restrictions on the speech Twitter allows around elections. The colleague wants to know if the decision means Trump can finally be banned. The person asks, does the incitement aspect change that calculus? Roth says it doesn't. Trump continues to just have his one strike. Here is that exchange, where he concluded with "this is for everything else." Roth's colleague's query about incitement to violence heavily foreshadows what will happen the following day. On January 8, Twitter announces a permanent ban on Trump due to the risk of further incitement. Following is that presser. On J8, Twitter says its ban is based on specifically how are being received and interpreted. But in 2019, Twitter said it did not attempt to determine all potential interpretations of the content or its intent. Following is first the excerpt of the presser explaining why they banned him. And this next screenshot is from 2019, where they said the exact opposite about their policy. The only serious concern we found expressed within Twitter over the implications for free speech and democracy of banning Trump came from a junior person in the organization. It was tucked away in a lower-level Slack channel known as Site Integrity Auto. He says, this might be an unpopular opinion, but one-off ad hoc decisions like this that don't appear rooted in policy are a slippery slope. This now appears to be a fiat by an online platform CEO with a global presence that can gatekeep speech for the entire world. Following is the screenshot of that communication. Twitter employees use the term one-off frequently in their Slack discussions. Its frequent use reveals significant employee discretion over when and whether to apply warning labels on tweets and strikes on users. Here are typical examples. Employee writes, could have bounced with a strike. I don't see any scenario where we would decide not to bounce here. Just want to check if there are any concerns, otherwise, I can bounce under a TP and close this one before I go. FYIs, account for review, we are trying to understand the one-off decision here. And in another exchange, one employee writes, there's always abuse one-off. Bounce, one-off is the option. Recall from #Twitter Files 2 by @Barry Weiss that, according to Twitter staff, we control visibility quite a bit. And we control the amplification of your content quite a bit. And normal people do not know how much we do. Twitter employees recognize the difference between their own politics and Twitter's terms of service, but they also engage in complex interpretations of content in order to stamp out prohibited tweets, as a series of exchanges over the #StopThestial #reveal. And this exchange between an employee and Yoel Roth is as follows. Employee says, hey, Hope you're doing okay and were able to get some sleep. Can we, or have we already discussed, blocking hashtag Stop the Steal? It's furthering fake news in a dangerous way from what I can tell. Yoel responds with, hey there, we're proactively surfacing that content for review under civic integrity and it should be BLO9 Kid from Type Ahead and Trends. If you're seeing it in either of the latter two, let me know ASAP and PT can fix. In the continuing exchange, employee responds saying, I just saw the hashtag and then did a search on it and all the content was appalling. So, I don't think it's showing up elsewhere. Thank you for all you're doing. Roth says, I'll flag to the election squad. Remember that what I find appalling and what is ATOS VIO are not an exact overlap. Roth immediately DMs a colleague to ask that they add Stop Thestial and Q conspiracy term Kraken to a blacklist of terms to be deamplified. Roth's colleague objects that blacklisting Stop Thestial risks deamplifying counterspeech that validates the election. Here's that exchange. Roth says, no, there's a lot going on. Any objections to adding Stop Thestial and Kraken to the CHAQ term lists if they aren't already there? He adds, the daylight separating Q and Stop Thestial stuff now is effectively zero. Employee responds with, Kraken for sure if it's not already there. Then he says, I'm too worried about the risk of deamplifying counterspeech with Stop Thestial. Roth responds with, Ack. Indeed, notes Roth's colleague, a quick search of top Stop the Steal tweets and their counterspeech, but they quickly come up with a solution, deamplify accounts with Stop Thestial in the name profile since those are not affiliated with counterspeech. That exchange is as follows. But it turns out that even blacklisting Kraken is less straightforward than they thought. That's because Kraken, in addition to being a Q conspiracy theory based on the mythical Norwegian sea monster, is also the name of a cryptocurrency exchange, and was thus listed. That exchange is as follows. Roth says, also I think adding Kraken to the various bots may have broken something. Employee says, oh guys, I removed Kraken the other day FYI. It did break something. There's an app called Kraken app or something. If we list that, no concerns about putting it back, but would want to see if there are other FPs. Another employee says, the brand Kraken account is listed FWIW. Yeah, it's a crypto exchange. Employees struggle with whether to punish users who share screenshots of Trump's deleted J6 tweets. We should bounce these tweets with a strike given the screenshot violates the policy they are criticizing Trump, so I am a bit hesitant with applying strike to this user. Here is one example. What if a user dislikes Trump and objects to Twitter's censorship? The tweet still gets deleted. But since the intention is not to deny the election result, no punishing strike is applied. If there are instances where the intent is unclear, please feel free to raise this a screenshot of that exchange with an example that they're debating over. Around noon, a confused senior executive in advertising sales sends a DM to Roth. Sales exec, Jack says, we will permanently suspend if our policies are violated after a 12-hour account lock. What policies is Jack talking about? Roth, any policy violation in this exchange. The sales exec asks, hi Yoel, I have a question regarding Twitter safety thread regarding POTUS and Jack's email. Jack says, we will permanently suspend if our policies are violated after a 12-hour account lock. What policies is Jack talking about? Is spreading misinfo a violation like his past tweets? Oh, or is it more about a tweet of incitement? I'm asking because we are getting tons of calls from clients following Facebook Instagram decisions, so some clarity would be great, thanks. Yoel answers, hey JP, for internal awareness, this would be any policy violation not just limited to elections. But before sharing anything, please coordinate with name redacted on the comm side. Obviously a ton of interest in our position on this, want to ensure we stay aligned. What happens next is essential to understanding how Twitter justified banning Trump. Sales exec, are we dropping the public interest now? Roth, 6 hours later, in this specific case, we're changing our public interest approach for his account. In the actual exchange, sales exec says, thanks Yoel, we'll connect with Com's team for sure. One last question. In the past, we exempted policy violation from a world leader due to public interest value. Are we dropping the public interest now and any new violation could be a trigger? For me to understand, again we'll check with comms regarding what we can and cannot share publicly. Roth replies, apologies for the slow reply. I've been back to back all day today. In this specific case, we're changing our public interest approach for his account to say any violation would result in suspension. We aren't completely getting rid of the public interest approach, though we do have work planned on revisions in H1 2021. The ad exec is referring to Twitter's policy of public interest exceptions, which allows the content of elected officials, even if it violates Twitter rules, if it directly contributes to understanding or discussion of a matter of public concern. That policy is as follows. At present, we limit exceptions to one critical type of public interest content. Tweets from elected and government officials given the significant public interest in knowing and being able to discuss their actions and statements. Roth pushes for a permanent suspension of Rep. Matt Gaetz even though it doesn't quite fit anywhere. It's a kind of test case for the rationale for banning Trump. I'm trying to talk safety into removal as a conspiracy that incites V. In that exchange, an employee asks Roth, what's the latest on Antifa claims? Anything brewing policy-wise? C is yelling from other room that we should just ban Gaetz. Roth answers, yeah, SP and SI are working on that. It doesn't quite fit anywhere, duh. Employee responds, right. Roth says, I'm trying to talk safety into treating it as incitement. I think we'll get over the line for removal as a conspiracy that incites V. Vijaya was directionally okay with it. Around 2:30, comms execs DM Roth to say they don't want to make a big deal of the Q ban to the media because they fear if we push this it looks we're trying to offer up something in place of the thing everyone wants, meaning a Trump ban. In that exchange, comms exec says, we're good either way. We'll discuss, but I'm generally in the space of let's start taking action and not do a big comms push around this. We can explain why if we're asked, but worry if we push this it looks we're trying to offer up something in place of the thing everyone wants. Roth responds with, yep. That evening, a Twitter engineer DMs to Roth to say, I feel a lot of debates around exceptions stem from the fact that Trump's account is not technically different from anybody else and yet treated differently due to his personal status, without corresponding Twitter rules. In that exchange he writes, Hi Yoel, I'm sure you are very busy right now, and my apologies if this is distraction to your work. I wonder if there has been discussion about reshaping the rules around official accounts such as real Donald Trump and other accounts, or an unverified account. I feel a lot of debates around exceptions stem from the fact that Trump's account is not technically different from anybody else and yet treated differently due to his personal status, without corresponding Twitter rules to clarify the responsibilities that should come with status. Roth's response hints at how Twitter would justify deviating from its long-standing policy. To put a different spin on it, policy is one part of the system of how Twitter works. We ran into the world changing faster than we were able to either adapt the product or the policy. In that exchange, Roth says, I think you're spot on. To put a different spin on it, policy is one part of the system of how Twitter works. There are different things you can change when you want to affect different behaviors. Policy and enforcement are one, the product is another, partnerships and outreach are another, etc. And all of that is situated in a bigger system, i.e., the world, which influences how everything else operates in practice. When you change one part of the system, you necessarily have to adapt the rest. And I think we ran into the world changing faster than we were able to either adapt the product or the policy. But we can and should do both. Not directly. The evening of January 7th, the same junior employee who expressed an unpopular opinion about ad hoc decisions that don't appear rooted in policy, speaks up one last time before the end of the day. He states, this might be an unpopular opinion, but one-off ad hoc decisions like this that don't appear rooted in policy are a slippery slope. This now appears to be a fiat by an online platform CEO with a global presence that can gatekeep speech for the entire world, which seems unsustainable. Earlier that day, the employee wrote, my concern is specifically surrounding the unarticulated logic of the decision by FB. That space fills with the idea that all internet moguls sit around like kings, casually deciding what people can and cannot see. In this exchange, he concludes, and it's unhelpful to the internet ecosystem as a whole. Again, this is in my humble opinion only. The employee notes, later in the day, and will Oremus noticed the inconsistency too, linking to an article for 10 at Medium called, Facebook chucked its own rulebook to ban Trump. The underlying problem, writes at Will Oremus, is that the dominant platforms have always been loath to own up to their subjectivity because it highlights the extraordinary, unfettered power they wield over the global public square, and places the responsibility for that power on their own shoulders. So they hide behind an ever-changing rulebook, alternately pointing to it when it's convenient and shoving it under the nearest rug when it isn't. Facebook's suspension of Trump now puts Twitter in an awkward position. If Trump does indeed return to Twitter, the pressure on Twitter will ramp up to find a pretext on which to ban him as well. Indeed. And as at Bari Weiss will show tomorrow, that's exactly what happened. You have been watching the Twitter File series on Truth Cherry. Thank you. Please subscribe.